All right. So let's talk about semicolons. So semicolons are a type of punctuation point that's sort of in between a comma and a period. Um, Semicolons can be a little confusing, which makes them one of the more underused of of punctuation points, but you can use them in the right circumstances to good effect. Um, so we're going to go over a few ways that you could use a semicolon um, and what those situations entail. So one way to use a semicolon is between independent clauses. So usually we want to put we oftentimes when there's two independent clauses, we just put a period between them. But we also could put a semicolon. So a semicolon can conjoin a sentence to another sentence, essentially, right? One independent clause to another independent clause, making it a sentence with two independent clauses. So we have here the silence deepened, the room chilled. Each of these could be their own sentence, but we can put the semicolon in between instead, and that connects the two. So when we say the silence deepened, the room chilled, with the semicolon in between, it indicates that both of those are related ideas. The silence deepened and the room chilled, those things are both describing the same thing that's going on in that circumstance, in that room, right? Another one, the life had not flowed out of her, it had been seized. In this case, we have a semicolon that connects two things that are saying, that are also connected. They're saying a similar thing, right? So we have the life had not flowed out of her, it had been seized. So the it is the life had been seized. So we're saying in the first sentence, we're saying that what happened to the life, right? And in the second sentence, we're also saying what happened to the life. So we're connecting the ideas of what happened to the life together, making it one sentence. So in situations like that, you can use the semicolon to connect those two sentences. You can also use it. You can use it with a transition too. So there are no secret economies that nourish the poor. On the contrary, there are a host of special costs. So the transition here is on the contrary. That's a transition phrase. And it connects this sentence, this independent clause, to this independent clause. Both of these could be their own sentences, right? But by connecting them with a semicolon, they become one big idea with a combination of two independent clauses. We can also use semicolons when we have a series, but there's commas in the series. So usually we would use commas to mark off a series, right? So we could say, I could ask you, what classes are you in? And you might say, I'm in English, comma, math, comma, and science. So that's a series of a series marked off by commas, right? But you also could mark off a series by semicolons if the series has commas in it too. So here we have an example. So there are images of a few students, and then we have a colon. So now we're going to get into the list of students, right? Erwin Petschauer, a muscular German boy with a strong accent. David Sanchez, who was good at math, and Sheila Wilkes, everyone's curly-haired heartthrob. So what do we notice about this series? it's marked off by semicolons. Those semicolons are where the commas would be. Why did we do it like this? Well, notice we are describing each item in the series. There's 3 items in the series, right? Each is a name of a different person. But then we're using a comma to describe the person. Erwin Petschauer, comma, a muscular German boy with a strong accent. So we're already using a comma within the item being listed. So it wouldn't do to use a comma again for marking off items in the list. It would be confusing. So instead, we're doing the name with the comma, then a description. Then to mark off that item, we are using a semicolon. This whole thing is the item, right? The item in the list is Erwin Petschauer, a muscular German boy with a strong accent. So we're marking that whole thing off with the semicolon because it already contains a comma. Now for this one, it's the same. This is the second item in the list. And for this one, it's the third item in the list, right? And it also has a comma. Now, what mistakes might we make with semicolons? They're confusing. They're one of the more confusing types of punctuation, so it's likely that we'll make mistakes with them. If you don't understand semicolons, you might just want to forego using them in the first place, right? Maybe better to just leave semicolons out than use them incorrectly. So we'll talk about here what are some things that can go wrong. So let's look at the first example here. When the sun finally sets, semicolon, everyone gathers at the lake to watch the fireworks. So what's wrong with this? Well, what's wrong with it is this is an introductory clause, not an independent clause. When the sun finally sets, that's not an independent clause. That can't be its own sentence. Specifically, the when makes it an introductory clause instead of an independent clause. So we're not going to set it off with a semicolon. We would set it off with a semicolon only if it was an independent clause. So if it said, if the sentence read, the sun finally sets, semicolon, everyone gathers at the lake to watch fireworks, that could work with a semicolon. But the way it's written, when the sun finally sets, comma, everyone gathers at the lake to watch fireworks, we want that comma there because it's setting off the introductory clause. All right, the next example, what's the problem? Every American high school student should know that the U.S. Constitution contains 3 sections. So they had a semicolon, but they cross it out right here. What did they put instead? They put a colon. Why did they put the colon? Well, in this case, we know, based on the context, specifically this phrase contains 3 sections. We know based on that context that we're introducing a list. How do we introduce a list? We do it not with a semicolon, but with a colon. So we got rid of the semicolon and we replaced it with a colon. And now we have the list: preamble, articles, and amendments. So that's a list. It's set off with a colon. You don't want to use a semicolon as a colon.